Welcome to Filling You In, a dental podcast with A Squared, where dentist entrepreneurs and spouses, Dr. Anushka Gaglani and Dr. Abhishek Nagaraj, welcome industry experts and innovators to explore trends in business practices, patient care, career development, and what it takes to be successful in dentistry.
Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Filling You In. I'm Dr. Abhishek Nagaraj.
And I'm Dr. Anushka Gaglani, collectively known as A Squared. Today, we are delighted to welcome a preeminent force in healthcare media whose popular magazines, newsletters, podcasts, and conferences have become an essential source of information and insights for decision makers in the industry.
Scott Becker has built the extensive Becker's healthcare media platform while also a practicing lawyer for over 30 years at McGuire Woods, repeatedly ranked as one of North America's most innovative law firms. In addition to healthcare, Scott's expertise also includes private equity and venture capital, where he contributes as an active investor. We're looking forward to exploring the fascinating career he has built at the intersection of healthcare, media, and law, and benefiting from his perspectives on entrepreneurship, business growth, and investing. Scott, it's truly an honor to have you on our show.
Well, no, thank you so much. It's a privilege to be with you, and so thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to a far-ranging discussion. And I saw some of the questions you sent in advance. I think I'll fail on a couple of those, but I'll probably do as well as I can on the rest of them. So thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
It's truly our pleasure. I'd like to dive in by asking, someone with a law degree and accounting expertise can go almost in any direction career-wise. How did the healthcare industry first get on your radar as a professional interest?
Sure. So I love the question because so many people have these origin stories about healthcare and how they got into healthcare. And they often start with, this person that was close to me died from a billing error, so I started a revenue cycle company, or this person, had this issue. It was 3 steps removed from me, but it really touched me, and I ended up in the healthcare business because of that. And so I don't have any glorious or interesting revenue origin story like that. I started in healthcare. I was a young lawyer. I was building a practice. I had some deals that came across my desk that ended up being healthcare related business efforts and transactions. I started doubling down or dabbling in it, developing what today would be called thought leadership. Back then it was just called sort of speaking and trying to brand yourself, whatever you might call it. And I started to do a short newsletter, a short conference. At some point in my late 20s, started to specialize, really made the choice to specialize entirely in healthcare. But it was really growing a law practice, and at that point, really trying to grow thought leadership for a law practice versus trying to build a media business. And it was fascinating to me. It was easy at the time when I made the decision to really build my entire career around the healthcare sector. There were some people that were like, oh my God, you're closing off half the world, you're closing off this, you're closing off that. I was a big believer in niches in general. I had some healthcare experiences, some work with healthcare, and I ended up making the decision in my late 20s, okay, I don't want to be all things to all people. This is 20% of the economy. It was at the time they thought maybe it would become a lesser percentage of the economy. That certainly hasn't happened. And so there were going to be plenty of opportunities in it, and it gave me a chance in a wide area to really try and build a niche, to build expertise, to learn, to meet people. And that's how I sort of ended up sort of in healthcare. It wasn't built on some altruistic thing, oh my God, I want to save America. It's like saying that most lawyers want to save democracy. That's just not the case. They're just doing the job. They're building a business. And that's really the reality of where we ended up in it. And it was a long time ago. And then, quite frankly, never looked back. It's been a fantastic career across media, across law, and dealing with just fantastic people across the board. I just love it. So that's how we ended up in healthcare.
It's quite a journey. So as we mentioned, you have a large portfolio of publications, and I think most of our listeners are familiar with at least Becker's Hospital Review and Dental Review. What's the backstory of how you got into publishing?
Sure. So it really goes to what we were just mentioning. And when I was early on in my legal career, what happened in the practice of law, I was at a huge firm, and what you had was this huge divide in law firms. If you had your own clients in your own practice, you had freedom, you had autonomy. It's like having your own dental practice versus working for a huge MSO or a huge organization. You got your own dental practice, you've got some control of your life. At a big law firm, it was very similar. So I was a young person, I was an observant person of what was going on in the business world. And in our law firm, there were these people that were fantastic lawyers that were in their 50s, and they did not have their own clients. I mean, they worked for other clients of the firm. And that is great. That's honorable. It's fantastic. The thing that was a problem was those people in their 50s that were great lawyers that didn't have their own base of legal business, their own clients, were literally treated like dogs. They were treated horribly. And this is back in the day. This is 30, 40 years ago. The veneer is much nicer today, but the lack of control of your life is not that different. So what happens is people would be 50 years old, it'd be Friday afternoon, and some other partner that controlled business would be able to say to them, you got to work in this all weekend, and the person who had a great lifestyle and was making a great income at the law firm really had no choice. They would have to work on it for the weekend because the thing that was in demand was client business, not necessarily the legal work, but you had to have great people do the legal work too. And so I never wanted to treat anybody like a dog, but I also didn't want to be that vulnerable and that fragile. So I set out in my early 20s to build a practice. I built a practice in the healthcare sector, and I used what today you think of as thought leadership. Lots of newsletters, lots of writing, lots of speaking. I remember my initial business plan was I'd do this many speeches a year, this many letters a year, this many discussions a year to try and build a reputation within healthcare to build a legal practice. Now, you fast forward several years, I had built this great following both in the law practice side, but really people interested in the business side of healthcare and what we were doing, had built this great following of people that were reading the stuff I was providing and that were coming to the very small conference that I was putting on. And at some point, that little conference, those little newsletters that were intended to be just thought leadership to build a legal practice, started to be profitable. And I started to look at this and say, it's sort of like I wasn't trying to build a media business. About 5-10 years into it, I said, oh, wow, this is really interesting. I ought to start trying to truly build a media business in addition to building the law practice. At that point, I started hiring people. I hired about 10 people early on, and that was just a bit of a cluster because I had hired 10 people. I was running a law practice full-time. I had built a great team there. I had about 10 different people going, writing, selling, planning agendas, planning conferences, and it was just a bit of a mess. One of the people that I hired was a college student who was a client's niece, this woman, Jessica Cole, and Jessica was just a brilliant young woman, and she was hardworking, driven, motivated. You come across different people in your professional careers that are just iotas or eons ahead of other people. And so she was working out of her college apartment. I had about 10 different people going, all at different parts of their career that I, picked up and hired and tried to build a team with, and I was overwhelmed. Jessica was outperforming everybody, and I mean everybody, and at some point, her and I sat down. I put her in charge of everybody, and she was a young person, and between the two of us, we put together a strategy to really move from thought leadership to building a media company. And that was really the next level of the first real level of growth of Becker's Healthcare. And that goes back about 20, 25 years ago. Now, I've been in this for 30 plus years, which is incredible, but it's been fascinating. But it was really that thought leadership and then making a decision that, let's look at this and let's turn this into a serious business. And at that point, probably about 25, 30 years ago, that's the sort of the turn we took to move it into what we tried to make it into a great media company in healthcare.
Wow. Sounds like we all need a team member like Jessica in our lives.
Well, I think we do. I think what happens is in all these things, in the law practice, in the media business, I've been fortunate to have fantastic partners. In the law practice, we, with a group of people, built a fantastic healthcare legal practice, one of the best in the country. Literally does, almost $100 million in business a year, that law practice in the healthcare area. And it's a great practice led by colleagues that at one time worked with me, but now that I work for all practical purposes, and they've just done an amazing job. But the whole game of business is, and there's positives and negatives about it. But if you want to grow and do something significant, you've got to build teams. And building teams, I have this catchphrase, this concept. All teams you build have to be what we call thrive. Thrive means they're thriving, the company's thriving, you're thriving, versus you're thriving and they're not. Bad, good, thrive. And so what's happened in the law business, the people that used to be my mentees now really run the firm, they run the practice, they make great livings, they all make better livings than I do today, which is a positive, not a negative. This is great because they've thrived and I've been able to do the things I want to do. In the media business, it's very similar. I mean, the people that lead there do great. They've built great things. They've had great careers, but it's a thrive concept, and all these things come from different lessons. You have a lesson of like the first lesson of the first law firm where, if you didn't have your own practice, you were 50 years old and you were totally fragile and totally sort of invulnerable. Similarly, in the law practice, at one point we had a partner and we used to joke in different ways that a penny for him was more important than a dollar for the rest of us. And these were stark lessons in not developing a culture like that, but developing a thrive culture. In the dental practice, you could have fights over who owns a patient, in different businesses, different things. But somebody says, well, I once talked to that patient's aunt's aunt, so I should get some credit for that patient. You follow me? And we had enough partners like that. I flew over New York one time. I knew a person from New York, so I should get credit for that client. And we purposely at some point went out to build a team structure that was very different than that. That and it's not, there's no altruism. There's no, oh my God, you're so generous. I did great with it. They did great with it. And that's the goal. That we all do great versus it's a zero-sum game, which it doesn't have to be. But so many of these lessons you have come from different experiences that you have. It's very hard to teach them. I mean, it really is. Like I get, so much I have to learn from seeing it and experience and being tied in. I'll turn it back to you folks because once you get me going and I drink enough coffee, I can just talk. So I'll stop for a second. Sorry about that.
No, I love that. That's a great lesson, honestly. And, we have a different way of saying the same thing, which is we want to surround ourselves with givers because we're givers. So givers and givers rather than takers. Givers. So I absolutely love that.
No, I love that. And I'll just take a point in that because we just put together an appendix for a book. And it was a list of business books, and one of the books in it was a book that resonated right along those lines called The Go-Giver years ago. And again, none of us are perfect at doing it, but the idea is thrive, that we want people that are givers, not just takers. We want people that are managers and doers. There's all these different phrases that come with it, but I love that concept of when we surround ourselves with givers versus takers.
Yes.
Yeah, and these are some this is great wisdom, right? Like we please continue, to preach because this is so good for us to hear as young leaders too who are trying to scale our business. But just slightly pivoting from that, right? Like I know you put together like multiple conferences through the year that have just grown in popularity. Maybe if you can touch on what were some of the seeds for growing that dimension of the business from back in the day?
Sure. So when we really got going in the media business, there are a couple different things that happened. One is that I was really at first trying to build a practice and build a legal practice in connectivity. So I wasn't trying to build a conference business, but the connectivity and trying to have a chance to engage with lots of people that were leaders in the industry, some of which we could do business with, some of which they could do business in other ways, was just a great way to convene people. And we started off early on. There's multiple different things that drove this. All these things come from, and you're going to think at some point that I'm a horrible person because all these things come from a different lesson or different situation. So I was trying to convene people, to meet with people, and I was not able to speak at the time at the main trade association that was convening people because the trade association had their own relationships with law firms and with others. So you're sort of literally boxed out of it entirely. And that drove me to build our own conferences. And we built them originally just to have a chance to meet, convene, to network, to try and grow legal practice. Then, of course, at some point, similarly, we decided let's build this into real conferences. And there's been so many different lessons over the years. I mean, originally when we built a media business, there was a print publication that still is a print publication called Modern Healthcare that's fantastic. I don't know if you remember the name Modern Healthcare, but it was a Cranes communication. We couldn't afford to compete with Cranes and Modern Healthcare. They were sending it out to 60,000 people a week. I was self-funding. I would have gone broke in 2 weeks. So we decided early on we're going to be leaders in digital and leaders in conferences. Those were our 2 areas that we wanted to lead in. And this was before digital was that much of a thing, but growing to be a thing. But we just couldn't compete in the print business. We couldn't afford it. We just couldn't afford it by any stretch of the imagination. So we ended up doubling down on conferences, doubling down on events in digital. When we talk about our company, we think about it as events first and digital first. Those 2 areas, not print. And that ended up being that wasn't any kind of genius as to where print was going. It wasn't any sort of foresight. It wasn't like, oh my God, you're so smart. You knew that print was going to be a problem. We just couldn't compete in it. We couldn't afford it. It had nothing to do with genius. It had to do with like necessity of going into digital and going into events. And then there were a lot of things. One of the things that we preach to companies, I serve on some boards, I'm an advisor to some companies. We preach the concept of constant improvement. In constant improvement, you look at like how Apple's going through a bit of a more difficult time right now, but they're still a $3 trillion plus market cap company. You're on the iOS 17 or 18 in terms of the operating system, but that's a lesson for all of us. Judy Faulkner at Epic's a lesson for all of us. You have to be constantly improving. And so if I've been in the media business now for 30 plus years, obviously we've got a great team that drives a lot of these improvements today. But we had to constantly improve and fix and innovate in how we do our conferences to keep them interesting, to keep them worthwhile for people to come to. And there's so many different pieces of that we could discuss, and we don't have to. But it's been constantly trying to make sure that we're, pivoting back to our core, which is at least in hospitals, health systems being a great place for hospital and health system leaders. And then making sure we do so many things right, we try and teach and entertain. We try and make sure people learn a lot, but they also have fun. So years ago, as there was competition evolving, we moved towards having big keynote speakers. So we've had lots of former presidents, lots of former great athletes. We've got this year again, Caitlin Clark speaking, along with Jack Nicklaus and Wayne Gretzky. I mean, interesting people. And they're not obviously intended to talk about healthcare, but it's part of the entertainment concept. But there's so many different pieces of it that we keep on evolving to keep it valuable. And and so many lessons came from watching others succeed or fail in terms of how we try and drive it. And it's never perfect and it's always evolving, but we're trying.
It's really, really good information there. So Becker's was instrumental in starting the conversation about private equity in healthcare. What is your assessment of the positives and negatives of the role it's now playing in the industry?
Yeah, no, we say that private equity, we did a podcast on this recently, sort of the good, the bad, the ugly. I mean, the good, private equity works fine when you're in a high margin business where you're not over leveraging it, you're not putting so much debt on it, and it could be fine. It could be another financial tool like many other financial tools. So that works fine. That's good. And you see that still working in plenty of areas. I mean, there's this thing when people do a private equity deal and they buy part of a practice, they often try and capitalize this, and this is important to understand the good, the bad, and the ugly. They try and capitalize it by reducing the physician income to produce income at the practice level, to produce income versus all being distributed, and then the physician on day one of the deal gets a multiple of that. So let's say a physician income goes down $100,000, he or she might get a price of 8 to 10 times that and get $800,000 to $1 million. And that may sound fine. That obviously is a disaster if the physician was making $200,000 before and is now making $100,000 because they can't live on $100,000. If a physician was making $800,000 and you do what's called an income scrape of $100,000, probably fine. But when a physician does an income scrape of $400,000, gets $800,000, and takes home $4 million or $3 million after taxes, is always a lot less than you expect. But now you have a disaster in terms of how these things work. Because if a physician was used to making $800,000, and an orthopedic physician might very well be making $800,000, let me tell you, $400,000 might sound good to a lot of the population, but anybody that was making $800,000 now hates coming to work every day and making $400,000. They just think it's like they've been cheated, they've been scammed, it's horrible. It's not. It's a business deal they did, but it's a prescription for a problem going forward. the old concept was that private equity, between management and other things, we'd help to get that income scrape back. But my experience has been if that income scrape reduction to create EBITDA is too big, it's like taking on too much debt. Now you're in trouble for the long run. So the good in private equity is you provide an exit vehicle. Many physicians would have no other exit vehicle. They get out some money. It's not too big an income scrape. They haven't overdone the debt. Those are good deals. Bad deals are you're going into a lower margin specialty. You're putting too much debt on it. So a ton of deals have been done over the last several years in OB-GYN, in other specialties, where it's really just a disaster, where it's like you've taken an income scrape, the physicians have monetized some of that up front, so they're happy on day one, but their incomes now are awful, and the debt, because the margins are tight, is hard to service. So you're really end up with trouble in terms of money and the ability to make the practice really work going forward. So that's the bad. The ugly is you get a private equity vehicle that has hit it so hard in terms of dividend recaps, in terms of trying to take money out and stacking debt in the organization, that you've left the organization really in trouble. The private equity fund has taken out money, but you've left yourself in horrible trouble. And that's the ugly. And you saw that with a major hospital system that defaulted and went bankrupt, that defaulted and went bankrupt. I mean, so you see some of that.
Yeah. No, thank you for touching on that. As a follow-up question to that would be, as it relates to dental, how bullish are you with private equity coming in? Do you think that for a entrepreneur who has age on their side and they're in the grind for the next 10 to 15 years, do you think private equity is the right vehicle to speed up growth, or do you think that taking on debt and bootstrapping is the way to go? What would your advice be?
Yeah, it's not. I don't think there's an absolute one or the other. The thing is, for an entrepreneurial dentist who's trying to build something, there's nothing wrong with building something, and there's nothing wrong with building something through private equity. But the key is that you really know what you're getting into, and that you're doing business with a good private equity partner. And just like there's thousands of private equity funds today, yes, they're all concerned about the bottom line, and they're all financial engineers, but there still is a big difference between some that really know businesses and are really operators as well as investors versus they're truly just investors. And sometimes when they don't really understand the business or the people, they can be very difficult partners. I mean, so it really just depends what you're trying to do, what you want to do. Now, once you bring in a partner, a financial partner, the reality is you are largely stuck with that financial partner for a long time. So you better decide that you really want to do it. And some people will say, well, I'm only going to sell 20%, I'm only going to sell 30%, and that's all fine. But once they own you in part two, you are stuck. So you got to make sure that it really works. The physician-driven organizations that do well post-private equity or after they've done a private equity deal, first and foremost, it's just like anything else, they've got really good management, meaning they've got a great physician leader and or great leadership with them and a great leadership team, because business is constantly evolving, but you need somebody leading the organization that's hungry for growth, that's hungry for improvement, that wants to make something of it. The best business leaders are interested first in building great organizations, and second, the money comes. So you need a leader that really wants to do this. And you see such a distinction out there. If you don't have a leader that really wants to do it, it's just not worth doing. Because having a partner is not going to change that. But you need somebody who really wants to lead, who's going to be great. And then it's about doing the right deal with the right partner and really having a vision for why you want to do what you're trying to do.
That's great insight.
Yeah, definitely. So we mentioned that you're an active investor. What types of investments have you made? And what's your advice to people about getting involved in the healthcare space in that way?
Yeah, so an active investor, let me start with the fact that by background, my core investments, just to make sure people are properly bored and don't get the wrong impression, my core investments are index funds, S&P 500 index funds, and then treasury bonds. So people, and that came from a lot of learning over a long period of time, and my number one goal of not losing too much money. So people get all excited about the next stock, the next this, the next that. Almost none of us can actually pick the next stock, the next this, the next that. So my first concept is my core of my investments are index funds and treasuries. That's the core. Then I'm an investor with several different private equity and venture capital funds, some well-known in healthcare. I'm an investor and venture capital investor with Andreessen Horowitz, a direct investor with them. I'm also an investor side by side with some of their companies. But there are multiple different thoughts that I have on it. And just so people are clear, some of my investments have done great. Some of them have gone to zero. And zero is what it sounds like. You put money in, and now it's worth nothing. So no sort of great shakes on it and stuff like that. My core advice is where I've done really well in investing is when I know what I'm investing in, and I'm investing side by side with people that are really driving it, that I really trust, that I really think they know what they're doing. So when I've done really well in investing, like I don't invest individually in startup anything unless I'm investing side by side with a private equity fund, a venture capital fund, or somebody else that I trust. I'm not putting enough money into it. I'm not doing enough diligence. I'm not hiring my own management team. So either I'm going to trust that they know what they're doing, and I'm going to invest side by side with them, and I'm along for the ride. So that's one. And largely I want to be investing side by side with really smart, really gifted people and organizations. So we do that. Then I periodically have invested with managers where things have not gone very well. And the advice that I have is if you're going to do new investments with certain managers, with certain investors, wonderful people, some of them are some of my closest friends, that you do one with them till you see how it goes, and then you figure out whether to double down or not. Whether you're going to do more and more with them. It's so you don't sort of and then I guess the third thing is we have this concept that we talk about investing called core and explore. So core is always going to be my index funds and my treasury bonds. And the explore is the monies we have in various different private equity funds and various different startup businesses. And I'm also still a core owner in Becker's Healthcare, which is a core business I started. So you have different net worth tied up in different places. But the thing I think about is having a core investment strategy. Mine ears towards conservatism, towards being careful, towards not losing money. And there's some FOMO because you lose out on some of the big market ups when the market's exploding, but you sleep well when it's struggling. And so start with a core. Right. Then we have a number of investments. I think I'm separately invested with 4 or 5 different private equity and venture capital funds, and it's a fascinating educational experience. It's a real learning experience. I mean, sometimes it's a learning experience in a negative way. I grew up not wealthy at all, and so when I there's this old phrase of the dog that catches the car. The dog catches the car and doesn't realize what they caught. So where I grew up, nobody knew of private equity or venture capital funds. Just it was not in the discussion. It was not part of any discussion where I grew up. Parents at some point went broke, et cetera, et cetera. We lived through all of that. So private equity funds, venture capital funds were not that was not on the agenda. When I finally had some money and was able to invest in some private equity and venture capital funds, it was like I was like the dog who caught the car. Because as much as I've invested with private equity and venture capital funds, it has gone fine, but just as well has gone the index funds and the treasuries. You follow me? I mean, it's like, you have an index fund, you never get a zero. You get a treasury bond, you never get a zero, unless our country's become so indebted that we screwed it all up. But that's a different story. But you never get a zero. You invest side by side and you invest in some startups, you all of a sudden get some zeros. Like you feel like, oh my God, I'm finally arrived where I can invest in this stuff, and you find it's not so good. It's like the dog who caught the car. So but my core advice is core and explore. You want to have a core investment theory that works for you and a strategy that works for you. You really want to invest in things that you know well. So periodically, like every investor, I have a conversation, I invest in a couple things based on a whim versus deep conviction. Almost always that goes poorly. And then I've invested side by side. The best successes I've had in investing have come being side by side with great investors or great managers. It's not like I'm not individually scouting out opportunities. I am trying to invest side by side with people that know what they're doing.
Love we keep resisting the temptation to be the dog that catches the next car, the next car, the next car. I love that you use that phrase. I'm gonna borrow
No,
that.
thank
That's
you.
really good. Would you would if you really had to boil it down, and there's so many nuggets in what you said, but I want to get down to the crux of this. If you had to really boil it down, what do you think are the skills or the qualities that you see most often in really successful entrepreneurs versus
Yeah,
not so
no,
successful?
we talk about three or four things. It's a great question, and I differentiate between great leaders in companies versus maybe entrepreneurs. I think the most valuable people in organizations have this great mix of drive, personal skills, and they're intelligent. They have all three. When we hire people, when we develop people, they got to have all three. Sort of drive. They got to want to do great. They also have to be bright, and they also have to have good personal skills. In terms of entrepreneurial success, that next level of success as a founder, as an entrepreneur, they sort of, aside from building teams, finding niches and stuff like that, they have to be sort of like, it's almost, they have to be so good at finding product market fit. And they have to be relentless at finding product market fit. So as you've built multiple dental practices, you have to find, here's the recipe that works for what we're doing. Here's what works, here's what doesn't work. And in businesses, I've had successes, I've had failures. My successes have all come when I've been relentless about finding the right product market fit and producing a great product and a great whatever we're doing. Where I've not had success is where I'm doing things, and you see this with engineers, that I love to do, but not necessarily somebody wants to buy. You follow me? They're two very different things. And then as an entrepreneur, you have to understand, if you're doing something that you love doing, but you don't have customers, this is great, but it's a hobby. Whereas in contrast, if you're doing something and you have customers, well, then it's a business. And you have to constantly work at, I'm the hugest fan of, we mentioned Judy Faulkner and Epic. You don't have to love or hate Epic, but what you have to admire is the relentless effort to get better over the period of time they've been in business. I mean, it's relentless amount of engineering talent they have hired, and they keep on getting better and better. Same thing with the Apple, the iPhone. It's same thing with Amazon. Obviously, got better and better at their customer experience. I mean, it's relentless effort to get better. But I think with an entrepreneur, great executives and leaders, great drive, intelligence, personal skills, great entrepreneurs, add that on and find product market fit, that they actually can have an eye and effort, they can connect dots, they can make product market fit. But then they got to build teams too. You can't do it without building teams.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a great take on it. It comes down to, like you said, having great EQ and drive and raise the floor. That's one of the things we're always talking about is we have to raise the floor. We're never going to get anywhere.
No, we love that. We love that concept of raising the floor. Totally.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think are the most significant trends on the horizon for healthcare, including dentistry, and how would you advise decision makers to be prepared?
Yeah, no, I think that there's so many different trends. The things I think about the most are two things. Supply and demand is just out of balance and getting worse, meaning supply of doctors compared to our need in our country. And I spend more time personally in healthcare than dental, so I'll start there. There's about 900,000 to 1,100,000 physicians in our country, and the 1,000,001 number includes those that are doing research, not practicing. So about 950,000 physicians that practice in our country. There's a population of 340 million. That ratio of doctors to population is the worst it's been in a very long time and getting a lot worse. So that supply and demand problem, I think, is a huge problem. Am I optimistic that some of that will be filled through technology, through NPs, through PAs, through other things? Yes, but I still think we need more doctors to go with our population to make this work in the long run. So that's sort of one trend we watch closely, is just this supply-demand imbalance and how bad it's getting. The second thing we watch closely, I was just on a podcast before this where I was talking to people that are in the automation world. They're automating things throughout healthcare. And so there is a lot of optimism around what can be automated, what can't be automated. But I think the take home that I take away from all of this stuff, comes back to a trust but verify perspective. Yes, we want to automate as much as we can, but we better have enough nurses and doctors on the back end just in case everything can't be automated. That we need both. We need more nurses, more doctors to go with that. The other thing I take away from some of these conversations is our sort of system. So many of these solutions that we're looking at are within the system. And I don't think there's going to be a great change to the system, but there probably needs to be. I mean, we're at a spot where there's, 4 payers that are of the 20 biggest revenue companies in America. There's several payers that are the biggest Medicaid managed care companies in America. Our payment system, our way of dealing things, our way of developing things has become so out of whack and so messed up that I don't know if it changes. When I was a lawyer, I always had this perspective. I never want to be 2 people away from my customer, from the client. I want to be closely enough managing that I know what's going on with the client. In the media business, the same thing. Like I never want to be so far removed that I'm not a step or 2 away from the client, a step or 2 away from what's going on. When I see things like direct primary care, in some ways I love it because it brings us back to a patient relationship with a physician that's not so obfuscated by 13 different layers of payment and complexity. I think we've sort of gotten to that spot. Dentistry is a real mix out there, as you know. You go to the dentist. In the old days, you saw your dentist, talk to your dentist. Now, in many dental practices, you see the dental hygienist, and that's right. You should be seeing the dental hygienist. Hygienist, I don't know if I pronounced it correctly or not, but you should be seeing the dental hygienist, of course, for the majority of your visit. But sometimes it feels like the dentist comes in for 30 seconds, not to do anything other than to make sure that they could actually bill for the service. And it's not that we're not going back to the age where the dentist did the cleaning like they did when I was a kid. We don't expect that. But there's some balance that's been lost where your relationship with the dentist is not your relationship now, at least in the practice I go to, is with the hygienist, not with the dentist. And it's okay to an extent, but it's trying to hit that right balance between things. But there's no way around that. When you've got 200,000 dentists in our country and 340 million people, that's not changing. It's just not changing. And so many things like primary care, we are so short primary care doctors in America. I recently, for example, went to reschedule my primary care visit, and the next available date they gave me was April 2026 for my physical. And I was like, and of course, the primary care physician is a friend of mine, so I could deal with it and get it if I want to. But I thought the calendar system, I thought was just messed up. I thought it was just wrong. So I called the office. I'm like, it shows my next available appointment's April 2026. And said, yeah, that's the next available physical, for a physical appointment that we have. And it's not here nor there, but it's another example of where the shortages are in our country. I mean, just that there's your next physical is a year from now. It's just another anecdote about how the supply and demand thing is so messed up. So technology, preventive health, all these things are great, but we also need enough nurses and doctors. The largest countries in the world that don't have enough nurses and doctors, they produce great nurses and doctors. Thank God a lot of them come here, but their healthcare systems are a disaster. I mean, just a disaster. So it's like, and so many of those have moved towards, we need to do prevention on everything, but we've got a lifestyle issue in our country and in every country. We're not going to solve our healthcare problems for everybody eating better. It's just not going to happen. So we better have enough nurses and doctors and dentists to go with all these other solutions.
Right.
Yeah. That's some great insight on that.
Hopefully I'm not just blabbering on and on. Hopefully, but
no, not at all. Great insight. We're actually going to hop into our lightning round. So 3 fun little questions.
I'm going to fail on these. I saw these questions and I'm going to fail miserably, but go ahead.
What was your last impulse buy?
Oh my God. What happens is I do so many impulse buys. It's embarrassing. Like I'm an avid golfer. If you're an avid golfer, and I did a podcast on this today, avid would be an overstatement. Avid would imply good. I'm fine. But I'm constantly buying clubs with the concept that this will change my life and change my game, and it never does. And there's like, in this country, this would be a different stat for you. In this country, $550 million worth of putters were sold last year. That's about 4 million putters. That's everybody believing that the new putter is going to change their game and they're going to become a better golfer, and it's never the case. So I'm a constant buyer of golf clubs that I think are going to make the difference. I can't help myself. I'm also a constant buyer of, it's embarrassing. I feel like Imelda Marcos, which is way before your folks' time, but I'm periodically buying different kinds of shoes and stuff like that that are unneeded. But I've got golf shoes and I've got golf clubs that are just ridiculous, a ridiculous amount that are unneeded and don't make a difference in my golf game. Like, every time somebody has a golf club, they think their handicap index, so I keep scoring golf, is going to get better. It's like buying running shoes and thinking my running times are going to get better. It just never seems to happen. It's but those, I'm constantly impulsively buying those, and the more embarrassing impulse buys we won't talk about here, or the more expensive ones, but that's the regular one, is the golf clubs and the golf shoes and stuff like that. It's like I get teased about it endlessly. I have to do deals with my children. There's certain things. All of us have habits. So, I used to always wear different kinds of black vests. They're not up here right now. It's like a black, Patagonia vest, or this kind of vest. And my daughter would tease me, if you buy one more vest, I'm going to kill you. Because it's always the same things that you're used to buying and wearing that you think. And then what happens is you get older, and you're out like someplace and you see, all the 73-year-old guys are wearing black vests and thinking they're cool, and I'm much younger than that still. And you're like, maybe it's not such a good look. But those are some of the impulse buys that we do, and we need a 12-step program for them.
It's whatever sparks joy, right? Sometimes at the end of the day. Yeah.
I guess. And at least they're not too expensive, so they're dopamine fixes that at least are not going to kill me or kill the family.
Right.
What are the least likely 3 words someone would use to describe you?
I don't know. That's a great question. It's so funny. You say the 3 words. There's this great Charles Barkley clip where he says 7 words, and they give him endless abuse for saying 7 words, not 2, and it's really funny. I don't know. I just don't know what the 3 words are that would describe me. I don't know. Obviously, I'm not quiet by nature, and I try and hit that right balance in discussion so I'm not obnoxious, But, people wouldn't describe me as particularly quiet. You try and be gracious, but all of us are every single human is one of the great phrases somebody shared with me years ago is no one goes through this life unscathed. Mm-hmm. And so people that don't know me that well think, oh my God, he's so professional and organized. And the first time one of those people gets in my car, they're like, oh, I guess not so perfect, and all of us have so many flaws, yeah. and so I think, I don't know what 3 words, but the lesson I've learned in life is no one goes through unscathed, and all of us are flawed, and you hope not too publicly, but all of us are flawed.
That is so true.
We will add a word for you, though. We will say you're probably one of the most humble people that we've met based on what you've accomplished, right? I will tell you that just because we've been in conferences where you've spoken. We were at the JP Morgan event. You are super humble. I will give you that.
100%.
Well, no, I appreciate that. All of us grow up in different ways. I grew up as a good enough everything, but as a chubby little kid that used to have to shop at the Husky section. So you never forget that. You never think of yourself differently. I see these people that grow up and they're super fit and they think they're different people. And I work hard at staying in good shape and mentally and physically healthy. But you never forget your 13-year-old self. And most of us are never we're never very different than that. Different veneers, different shades of it, but we're all sort of trying to stay in the world, trying to stay engaged, trying to stay busy, trying to make an impact, and trying to enjoy it, But mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I just, you think yourself how you think yourself. So wherever you're at, there's always somebody who's cooler. There's always somebody who's richer. There's always somebody who's smarter. There's always somebody who's thinner. It just is what it is. And you have to it's very hard not to. I find it very hard not to remain sort of humble because every day is a challenge. Mm. Every day is a challenge of trying to sort of stay intentional, do what you're trying to do, have an impact. Every day is a challenge. It's when we describe it to our children, it's every day is a challenge. Literally, mm-hmm. It's no matter how much success you've had. It's and there's all these adages about money. You have money. You have to have a certain amount of money to be safe and to be able to take care of your family. After that, your happiness is your happiness. So you're trying to constantly figure it out.
So true.
No, thank you, though.
Wise words. Last question. What is your go-to karaoke song?
Yeah, so I am not a karaoke person. I don't know what my go-to karaoke song is. I will tell you, I grew up in the the 70s, which is so embarrassing to date myself like that. But so if you're in my car, it is generally, if the music is on, it's 70s, it's 70s on 7. And there's just a million songs from that generation, from the Queen anthems that We Will Rock You, to the AC/DC Back in Black, to a ton of Rush songs, to a lot of Neil Young songs, Rust Never Sleeps, Hey Hey My. So I don't know that I actually have a karaoke song. I don't know. I haven't done karaoke in 100 years. I'm mortified when I see myself on tape or in a bar doing it. So it's not. It would not be my thing absent several drinks, and I really don't drink very much. So it's hard for me to think of a karaoke song. But the songs that come to mind, there are so many of them from back in the day that I just love when they're on the radio and stuff like that. But it's classic rock stuff.
Nice. All right. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. This was honestly, you're a wealth of knowledge, and we're honored to have you on.
Well, for me, it's a tremendous pleasure. It just is. It's not a have to do this. It's a great pleasure. I get to do it, and I'm so thankful to be asked. So thank you, folks, very, very much.
Thank you. I'm Dr. Anushka Gaglani.
I'm Dr. Abhishek Nagaraj. Thanks for checking out today's show, and we hope you can join us again next time.
Thanks for watching this episode of Filling You In, where we uncover the insights, trends, and stories shaping the dental industry. If you like this podcast, please share it on your social channels and visit Areo Dental Group on LinkedIn or on Instagram @Areo Dental Group. You can also subscribe to the series and check out all of our episodes on this YouTube channel or at areodental.com/podcast. Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and let's keep elevating the dental field together.